Hello everyone, welcome to another episode of our Beyond Stigma series, focusing on Middle Eastern and North African representation in the media, where we delve into discussions surrounding different identities and experiences of those who have worked in the media and the arts and entertainment industries.
Thank you so much for joining us as one of our guests today. Ahmed is head of Get Into Theatre for the Stage in Support with the Andrew Lloyd Webber Foundation and UK Theatre /SOLT. He is also the lead theatre lecturer at the Royal Conservatoire of Trinity, Laban. Currently, Ahmed is a PhD research candidate at the Royal Centre School of Speech and Drama, which involves research into theatre training, equality, diversity and inclusion. Ahmed's background began with training in arts education and then a career as an actor. After a 12-year career on stage, he transitioned into teaching, working at School 21, London as head of drama and head of middle school, and also tutoring and directing at drama schools. Ahmed, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. Complete honor. Thank you very much.
The first question we've been asking most of our guests is just like a general broad one. But what made you want to pursue a career in this industry?
It's a really interesting question, and it has lots of answers. Really, I think my teacher, my drama teacher at school, was completely the reason, and I think that most people from a similar background to me, it is because of their school or their drama teacher that meant that they had access and exposure to this sort of British world of theatre. So, for example, my family, I'm from a Turkish background, and we weren't theatre goers, what I now call the theatre going class. We were Turkish immigrants in this country, and theatre just wasn't on the menu. We were very much living in our own community. My cousins were my best friends. We grew up together. So going to school in the 90s then, there was a huge resurgence in the Labour government of everyone had a chance to access the arts, a huge policy. And it just meant that actually I was the first ever year back then to have a GCSE drama. I was the first in the first cohort to have this official qualification. And so I had all this kind of strange exposure to this world of drama and theatre. And I guess the fire was lit then, and I attempted to do A-levels. And then it was a really strange story that accidentally a friend gave me a prospectus to a drama school. I'd never heard of drama school before. I'd never known anything about it. I went to see one show and thought, well, that's really, interesting and fascinating. And so this Turkish boy from East London left one day, didn't tell anyone, and went to an audition for a drama school in West London, really ill prepared. I didn't even know what a monologue was. I had to look that up and find out what a monologue was. I sang a song that was really ill prepared, for example, and somehow turned up to this audition for Arts Ed in West London, where people were really posh, and were really white and English, and I did this audition, and what they saw was obviously rough and ill-prepared, but potential and an unusual candidate. And it meant that, again, I was the first year ever to have this funding, which was the new national funding called the Dance and Drama Award, which meant that low-income household people could then train in a conservatoire, because it costs, back then, it cost £12,000 a year. Now, this is when universities used to be 3,000 a year. Now it's 17,000 a year. And it meant that I got funding, and then I could I was plonked in the middle of this very white British middle-class world of theatre training, which was hugely complicated. And now when I look back, I can understand all of the microaggressions and the racist, the daily racialization that I was facing every day. And then that led to a career in theatre, and I've knocked about in theatre for now 25 years somehow. And yeah, so that's the story. It all began with a drama teacher. and a very skeptical family.
Could you give us an example of the microaggression that you were facing at the time and what you thought of it whilst you were undergoing it at that age? You know, what did it feel like? Did you realize it, or was it only in retrospect that you realized that that was actually quite racist of someone to say?
Yeah, completely. So let's just for context, you know, my father was very displeased by this becoming an actor. He just was very displeased. Again, you know, being the only son of a Middle Eastern family, it's me, the next generation. It's me. I have to sort of, you know, get us out of the of poverty, and I'm sure that's true for many Middle Eastern children. But you know, you have to be doctors and solicitors and have proper jobs. I'm sure. So when I left home, which was very unusual at 17, when I left home to do this, I had to make it work, and I had to make a success out of it. So there was no looking back. So with that in mind, pretty much anything they said at this at my drama school, I would have listened to, because I wanted to make a success of it. Within days, I'm saying days, a tutor, I won't say names, but a tutor pulled me aside and said, listen, last summer when I saw the list of names of people coming to our course for this, for next year, instantly I saw your name, and it stayed with me in an annoying way, and I couldn't let go of it, and it wasn't good, and we really need to talk about this name. And this was a conversation that went on for 3 years, where we really did over-obsess about my name, the fact that it's called Ahmet, Ahmet. It repeats itself, which is culturally very typical for Northern Turkish Cypriots. And what began to happen really was a huge battle with the name I was born with and what that represented. And the suggestion, and quite a strong suggestion, that I would need to change that name in order to conduct a career. Now, of course, that tutor was just telling me what they knew, which was what I was going to face when I went out into the industry. And they were right. And as an actor, the sort of 11 years of auditioning and casting, we are talking walking into a room and someone saying, Ahmet, Ahmet, is that a joke? Asking me if my actual name was a joke, more because it repeats itself. And lots of comments, lots of feedback I would get from my agent. For example, try to be less exotic next time. You're not quite exotic enough, not quite brown enough. Can we brown yourself up? And we were in this, and you can see in the Middle East, we're in this sort of middle area of not quite brown enough to signify this reductive thinking of race, this essentialist thinking of race, but at the same time, not white enough to pass for Joe Smith and play and be on EastEnders, not quite Italian or European enough. And I faced that all the time throughout my career, where I was basically couldn't be placed. And especially with casting, I was always the comedy character as well, the unusual comedy character. I would never be seen for the romantic lead. It was like they just couldn't quite place this Muslim, Middle Eastern face with just a leading actor, perhaps a young leading actor in love, a Romeo and Juliet scenario, for example. They were always generally white and British.
And did you ever at any point think about changing your name when that was always thrown at you for so long? Did you go through that stage?
I did, yeah. Benjamin was where I settled.
Really?
And then I felt like I was denying myself completely by having Benjamin, I don't know, blog or Benjamin, whatever. So I settled on my mother's maiden name, which was Benjamin Cavaz, because I couldn't quite accept this sort of anglicization of my name. But I never did it. I mean, I had so much honor for my father. I had so much respect for him. as I'm sure we both do. And I just couldn't do it. I couldn't look him in the eye and say, Dad, I'm not Ahmed Ahmed anymore. I'm Benjamin. It just felt fake. It felt like I was compromising who I am. My first language was Turkish. The food I ate was Turkish. I thought in Turkish, and suddenly I was really selling my soul, and it was something I wasn't prepared to do. But names are interesting. Names are signifiers to who we are, and it's weighted. And that since 2011 and the perceived war on terrorism, for example, having a Middle Eastern or Muslim sounding name signifies so many negative connotations. And that really what I'm describing was you know, in 1999, that has got worse now. And interestingly, my sister, who has two nieces, I have two nieces, my sister, we have tried to carefully select names so that they wouldn't be bullied at school, but at the same time honors their cultural heritage as well. And it's just really interesting, this sort of generational teaching that tells us how to survive as a Middle Eastern slash Muslim in this very British Islamophobic society.
Can I ask, obviously this might be a sensitive question, but so feel free to say no if you don't want to answer it. But in terms of coming across other people that would be from quote unquote BAME, you know, BAME backgrounds within your industry, which I'm sure you have, did you ever feel like you had it worse off or less worse in comparison, or would people seek to like invalidate your experience because you fall on this, you know, grayish area where you're not colored as such? So there is some people might associate a privilege to it regardless of the fact that your name may be something else and your background may be from somewhere else too.
I love that question and I can't wait to answer it. I've been doing a lot of work on this question because as a researcher in this field now, my positionality has become really important. Who am I to talk about diversity? Which is a huge question. I think in answer to your question, it's a long answer, but in answer to your question, it is, it's extremely complicated. And I think that I've sat in rooms before where people have said, look at the color of skin of everyone in this room. We have to be much more diverse. What I see there is truth, in that someone of color, someone with brown or black skin, what they would describe as brown or black skin, is will face very different barriers to someone like me who walks into a room or walks down the street, and we accept that. And Black Lives Matter told us that, and that's you know, and that's very, very important. But there's another teaching that is completely being ignored, that I think it's a basic, in that room when I'm sat there and people say, look at the color of people in this room, it's an assumption, and I think it's wrong. And what that is a micro invalidation of my struggle and my story as an immigrant in this country. And something that needs to change, and these people need education. For example, somebody with black skin who has the name John Smith, for example, on CV, they will get in through the door. Their struggle starts when they meet that person. I have categorically struggled with getting my CV through the next phase. Once you read my CV and it has Ahmet Ahmet written on it, people make all kinds of assumptions. They have stereotypes in their head. They think terrorist, let's be honest. And that is a huge barrier and has been for most of my career. It's about what a name-based racism. And we know that there's research that Renee Lloyd has given us about name-based racism, where people that have non-British sounding names are less likely to be put through to the next round of interview. And I am absolutely of no excuse to that. But also there is this idea of my culture what I've had access to and what I've been allowed access to just by being in my ethnic culture. And that is something that, whilst can't be seen as a signified, only is realized when you actually talk to someone and see their story. And so I urge people to really talk to people, to hear their story and understand why they're underrepresented, and how we can be much more inclusive about the word diversity. Diversity can't just mean people of color, because there are Latin American people, there are Middle Eastern people, there are people from Polynesia that are completely being forgotten and being left behind. And it's really important that we're completely inclusive.
Yeah, I think that's just such a good way to put it. And with this name-based racism, obviously there's no doubt that it happens in all the different industries and a lot of the jobs you want to apply for. You know, my name being Paniz Hussaini is already a very Muslim sounding name, and I've experienced that as well. But do you think that it's even worse being in this kind of industry, which is very much white, or more very Western, like you said when you first started, with mostly rich white people that you worked with? Would you say it's even worse being in this industry, having an ethnic sounding name as well?
I think especially as artists, you become a product, you become a brand. And so your name is almost the name of the perfume. And so it becomes really important, becomes your brand. And so there's certain assumptions when your name almost has to fit the face. And what does that even mean when people start to say that name has to fit the face? Let's really talk about that. So the face of who, the name that fits the face of who's in your mind. So what does an Ahmet Ahmet look like? And I've many times people say, you don't even look like an Ahmet. I was expecting someone else. And so I reply, what were you expecting? They were expecting somebody with browner skin who didn't have green eyes. It's racism. And it's my name is Ahmet Ahmet. I'm born and I'm here. I'm not half. People always ask me, are you half? I'm not half. Muslims are all over the world. They come in different shapes and sizes, and it's laughable that people assume otherwise.
Especially
you can see I get quite angry about it.
Yeah. Oh, but rightfully so, especially because I mean, maybe before the time of the internet it could have been a bit more excusable, but with globalization and access to so much information out there, you would hope that people were a bit less ignorant regarding these things. And you know, it's your next door neighbor, it's the person you work with, it's everybody's around you, always come on, or even the person that's working at the shop or your bank teller. You know, all of these people are from different backgrounds, and I do think it's a responsibility for people to know how there's spectrums and diversification and all sorts of shapes and forms that every people come in. And it's still sad to think that we're in the 21st century and having to deal with issues like this, and with the access that we have to the knowledge that we have. This has, from what I can tell at least, led into inspiring your PhD work and a lot of the research that you're doing at the moment. Could you tell us about that? And what's it looking like at the moment? And are there any new sort of things you found out that you didn't know before you started your PhD?
Well, I obviously had a whole epiphany whilst being an actor that something needed to change. And so that was through education, and then now diversity work in theatre, which then led to a PhD. I thought that I knew a lot about the subject when I started the PhD. And of course, 6 months later, I realized I know very little, and learning everything by reading so much. And it's incredible. What I'm learning, I think, is unfortunately quite a grim picture in terms of access to the arts and diversity within the arts, and namely theatre is what I'm talking about. It's not a good picture because there are so many diversity initiatives. But this word, even diversity, it lacks this specificity. You know, the word BAME, this sort of one size fits all, is failing the very mission that it's aiming to achieve. You know, and I'm reading time after time, there's just an ongoing theme that it's a paradox that they reach out to engage people that are currently not engaged in the arts and theatre, only to make them behave like white people and middle classness. And it's either that you bang to the same drumbeat as what we want you to, and you tell stories, either the stories that we want to tell, or tell your story in the way that we want to see it or hear it. And only then are you allowed to be part of the club. And it's this sort of post-colonial thinking that plays out over and over again. And in order to have true diversity, we need autonomy. We need people to fund people and leave them to tell their stories and tell their truth, rather than what we can see sometimes is white organizations and arts councils funding these ethnically diverse artists, and then disappointed when it's not about their family or not about ethnic diversity on stage. So for example, someone coming in from an ethnic diverse background and just saying, I'm going to put on Macbeth because I want to, it's not good enough. But putting on Macbeth but situated in Bangladesh is to their palate because it ticks their diversity box and means that they've succeeded. And it's this idea of this commodity, we're selling the brand of diversity. And unfortunately, it's the dark truth of diversity. And unless you're challenging everything on that level, we're not going to really see change.
And do you think because of this, it makes it even more difficult for people from MENA backgrounds, but also other ethnic backgrounds, to just play a role that they just want to play, that doesn't necessarily have to involve where they're from, or, you know, be very specific when it comes to religion and, you know, all that kind of stuff? Does it make it more difficult to just play a normal character that doesn't have all that storyline behind it?
Well, I mean, it's huge conversation now in theatre about who are you to be playing this role? And that stretches from LGBT to ethnicity, to colour, to religion. Who are you to be playing this role? And I think it's a really interesting question. I think that it's extremely hard for example, Middle Eastern people, when most roles are stereotypes, the way we're represented in the theatre, which has led to the Islamophobia and driven by it, actually, is a sort of a circle that keeps on rotating over and over again. But let's, you know, localizing this to Middle Eastern people in theatre, in media, and in the entertainment industry, they're not represented enough at all. We can have whole shows, for example, Joseph in the Technicolor Dreamcoat. I've seen several productions of that over the years, since sort of 1999. And it's an Egyptian show, and there's not one Middle Eastern person on stage. It's almost comical that they're all Western and European looking, and it's funny, and we accept it, and it's offensive. And I think that we need to move to a point where we're asking those questions. Who am I to be playing this role? Certainly that wasn't a conversation happening when I was acting, but it's happening now.
There is something that I worry about when it comes to sort of who are you, this conversation about who you are to play this role, because it's like when it flips sort of on its head, where you have a Middle Eastern person playing Macbeth, for instance, you know, in that case where Macbeth is obviously from an English background, English heritage, how could we sort of make it? What do you think there is a solution to that? Or because I can easily imagine those fingers being pointed back at us in that way.
And they do, you know, so they say, okay, well, let's be specific. Let's only have, for example, Arabic people playing Arab roles. So why then is an Arabic woman playing Lady Macbeth? Why is that happening? And I think it's, you know, it's a very complicated conversation. I think the point is, it's a conversation. What is your casting approach? Are you having these conversations? what does it mean? And unfortunately, in 2021, casting an Arabic female as Lady Macbeth without any thought at all is not acceptable. We have to. Casting, and we're talking about the body of the person, every casting decision we make is, unfortunately, it does become a statement unless it's white. And that is true. When you're white British in this country, you are seen as what we call the somatic norm. And anyone that doesn't fit into this somatic norm becomes an act of politics as soon as they're cast. And it's exhausting. So as soon as you have an actor of color on stage, it becomes a statement and it becomes a conversation. We are years behind what they call colorblind casting, where anyone is cast and no questions asked. Because as soon as you're making that casting decision, the audience, by signifier of the actor's name, the actor's nose, the actor's skin color, it signifies something in the audience, which then starts the racialization process.
And you've worked with so many people on these projects and on these productions. Do you find that you've worked with a lot of people from the same kind of background as you, whether that be Turkish or MENA overall, or not really?
I used to think that I was the only Turk in the business, actually. I used to say that. I think there's a few more now, but back then I mean, no, I'd never met anyone that was Middle Eastern. So that's why it was finally lovely to work with the MENA Arts group, because they're all these Middle Eastern, wonderful Middle Eastern people, most of them younger than me. And it's great because there is a shared unity. While obviously there's different countries and different languages, and we're not just one robot, there is a sharedness, there is a community about our culture, and there is a sense of advocacy between us about trying to wave and say, look, we're here and we need to be seen. And I think that is moving as access is improving by the programs that I was talking about, that I was sort of at the beginning wave of. But as our generation, we are an interesting generation. You're younger than me, but we are an interesting generation in Middle Eastern culture. We are becoming stronger in doing the careers that we want to. Our ancestors, our aunts and our granddads, and you were just born into a particular culture, and pretty much you did that, and that's pretty much that's a class thing as well. But we can choose. We have a freedom of choice mostly, and we're starting to exercise it, and that's why you are seeing a sort of MENA power coming up in all sorts of sectors, and it's wonderful to see.
Interesting, because you mentioned class and race, sort of side by side, and that's been a common thing throughout this entire conversation. There's definitely a thing that I think that is unique to the arts in particular, where you don't only have disagreement from the society outside, but also at home as well. Because you have that a lot of people being an actor, or going into the music industry, or taking up something that is more artistic is frowned upon by a lot of Middle Easterns. I mean, from my background, at least South Asian as well. Parents and families as well. It's but with that being side by side with the class aspect, which you've shown that you have experience as well, could you elaborate on that? Because it's interesting how I think other industries don't have that class issue as such. Like if you are going to become a doctor, I'm sure doctors also, BAME doctors, or from other ethnic minorities and such, face some sort of discrimination in those fields as well. But in the arts industry, the class aspect is more sort of emphasized as well. Could you elaborate on your experiences or your perspective on that?
Yeah. So there's a source called Culture is Bad for You, is what it's called, this sort of book. And what it talks about is the idea that in the arts, you've got the arts consumer is also the arts producer. And so when you localize that to theatre, what you have is a theatre going class, is what I call them, this theatre class, where you are more likely to make theatre if you were brought up consuming it, watching it, and being a part of it. And so, and that tends to be, it is a middle classness, and upper classness is about going to the theatre. So it's a very British activity. So of course, when your family immigrates to this country, you're not part of this theatre going class. A, because financially, going to the theatre is a hugely elitist and luxurious thing to do, something that is costly. And so there's that financial barrier that means that when you are not born into that sort of class, it means that it's you're not able to access it financially. But also, I'm talking about class from a cultural point of view, that my parents wouldn't have wanted to go to the theatre. It's just not their thing. They are very Turkish. They like all things Turkish, and that's okay. But the point is that you're not born into this theatre going class, and so you're very much outside it. And I think that they intersect with each other. This idea of race and class intersect each other in what theatre makes, and media and film, what they make as the outsider, the other, which doesn't fit into their norm, which is a sort of white middle class British maker. And I think that's very true. I mean, obviously, I don't want to be accused of generalizing. There might be someone who immigrated from a Middle Eastern country and the first thing they did was go to the theatre, and good for them. But I would put money on the idea that Middle Eastern people don't generally go to the theatre as much as their white middle class counterpart.
Yeah, I agree. I think being Iranian as well, I've seen it myself, not just theatre, but just going into the arts and entertainment industry. There's always someone pointing fingers saying, are you sure? Like, are you going to make money from this? Are you going to, like, you know? And do you think this is one of the reasons why MENA representation is low in theatre and in film and TV? Or do you think it's just because it goes back to the fact that people don't know enough about us and they don't want to learn more and how they can adapt to it and bring a diverse cast into the show they're making or into the film they're making?
I think the answer's simple. If you want to see more Middle Eastern, North African people, you need to tell more Middle Eastern, North African stories and tell them positively. Yeah. That's what you need to do. My family would have gone to the theatre if there was a play or a musical, I don't know, about Turkish Cyprus or something similar about Turkey, and they would have gone to see that. But there was nothing like that. And maybe there is now, not that I know of. There's very little of it. We can see a sort of resurgence of lots of other cultures popping up. But I think if you want to see more different kinds of people walking through your doors as theatres, you need to tell different kinds of stories in order to attract them. My parents don't want to watch a play written by a British white man hundreds and hundreds of years ago. They don't want to see that. But once they're in the theatre, maybe if they've seen a couple of great plays that they relate to, maybe then that they would be like, actually, this is fun. And now I have a taste for this. What else do they do? But until that happens, until you tell stories and make films that people can see themselves in, we're never going to see change. I mean, gosh, when was the last American blockbuster film that we saw that was just about a positive, I don't know, a family from Iran? I don't think I've ever seen that. It's usually a documentary, and it's usually about war, unfortunately.
Unfortunately, I mean,
which is sad.
I remember when Aladdin, the live action, came out, and like there's so many things wrong with it in terms of historically looking into it. There's a lot of things not correct. But even then, it made me so excited seeing like one Iranian actress in there playing like the role of a friend. And it just goes to show how like how little is needed to make us happy and to actually look up to someone and feel like, oh my God, like I can relate to some extent. And it's sad because if they were to add more people and to like make better stories about people from this region, they would get even more money as well. When you think about it, they would get so much more viewership as well. Like, it's just like, why don't they do it? It's just sad.
Yeah,
you know?
it is.
There is political narratives that are definitely infiltrating these, and I'm not very optimistic in it changing as much, because, you know, there's like, I'm sure you've come across in your research, Ahmed, the post-colonial narratives that we're trying to push for, you know, trying to like overturn those and decolonize these things as well. It's just the film industry is not doing very well on that front.
I completely wholeheartedly agree with you. The dark truth really is Islamophobia in this country is a huge endemic, and unfortunately I think we've got a lot of work to do to undo what has been quite damaging for a lot of Muslim people in this country. Huge generalizations, huge essentialist, even the act of the fact that Islam is a religion, and so therefore we're not even recognized as a race, because then when you recognize them, those people as a race, they are people. Huge dehumanization is happening.
I was going to ask more about the teaching that you do, and you know, you're an outreach director, you are doing a PhD, so you've done a lot of teaching and research on this kind of topic. And would you say, like, so I'm assuming you do talk about these things as a teacher as well, and how do you think people respond to it when you try and teach about this topic?
Well, it's interesting what happens. So within my teaching, I've become the one to go to with anything to do with identity or politics. I'm the one to talk to. I think that, you know, I'm lucky that the places that I work in are very, they take this very seriously. And I'm working within that field that does take it seriously. But I do feel, and unfortunately, whether you like it or not, once you are born into a certain identity, like Middle Eastern, North African, you will always be explaining that, talking about it, and probably advocating for it. And part of me thinks, why should I? Educate yourself. But at the same time, I can't help myself but try to do something about it rather than moan about it.
I mean, I agree, and it's just sad, because I was talking to someone else the other day, and she was also saying how every time she went for an audition, her ethnicity and her background was always a topic of discussion, and it would take up like 15-20 minutes of the audition time just talking to them about her background. And it's just like, why should you do that? You know, like, go and learn it yourself. At the same time, it's just that feeling of, if no one's talking about it, like, when is anything going to change? When are people going to start talking about it? So I can see where you come from.
And also, those conversations are probably really, really awful. You know, in 5 minutes, someone can make your whole past disappear by just a mere comment of, "Oh, you don't look very Turkish. You look more, I don't know, Italian." And you think, okay, well, thanks. Do you feel better now? Like, I don't know what you want to say to you. Like, I'm not lying. This is who I am.
And you, when you did audition for roles, did you end up in roles that were Middle Eastern, North African, or did you end up with more like European, Western roles because of your more, you know, your light eyes and the things that you were mentioning before?
I always got away mostly with European Western roles, but I was always the comedy character. And it didn't really matter. So I played sort of mostly, my most notable role was sort of like a non-human, lots of animals, and I can't really describe what I was. I was like but it didn't really matter where I was from and what I looked like. And most of the time it didn't really ever matter, and then I could fit in. When you talk about film and TV auditions, 9 times out of 10, it was based around themes of terrorism or a very specific Middle Eastern small part, like a hotel bellboy or something like that.
So interesting.
At the time, I didn't know it was even happening. I blamed myself. I just thought, what is it about me that, you know, and it's only now that I've come back to realize that actually it was me. It wasn't me, it was them.
100%.
Yeah.
It wasn't you. Don't blame yourself. But that's just sad, especially for people that are new to the industry or younger. I'm assuming it's happened to so many other people that start off in this industry from an ethnic minority background. They might get thrown into these kind of situations and just play along with it because they want to make it into this industry and become famous and all that kind of stuff. So it is quite sad that happens.
It is sad. I think that two things probably happen. So let's just assume just now I'm being the sort of the casting director, the theatre maker. So Panis, I probably, you would go unseen. Your ethnicness would probably go unseen straight away. That's how theatre works. They'll just sort of say, oh, Panis, would you like, no role for you really. You're not really English, but I don't know where you're from. I'm confused. And then this part, the theatre wouldn't be able to see past your headscarf. They would just talk about your headscarf all the time. They would just fixate you'd be the girl in the headscarf, and that's just the terrible self-narratives that the entertainment industry work.
Which is infuriating sometimes, because it's like the girl in the headscarf has started to show up on Netflix a lot more recently, and I picked up on it. And the way she showed up is the fact that the headscarf will always be oppressive, and for some reason or another needs to be taken off or even sexualized, you know, in the sense that, oh, there's always that one guy that's from a different ethnic background or mostly white, and he's shown as like the character that, you know, helps her get liberated from this headscarf, and they have to have a secret affair that and it's not the sort of representation, when you ask for representation at least, that you want to see. You know, obviously that ties into the Islamophobia that you were talking about before, but it's you know, it's like when Islam is shown and is shown in what other people might say as like, you know, is a more positive manner, it's really not. It's shown as, you know, again, what Edward Said would say as orientalized, you know, to the maximal level, but just people don't realize it. You know, it's saying no matter what happens, this scarf needs to come off for them to feel more comfortable. And so no, I can imagine that being the point of conversation within the theatre.
So as a closing question, I guess led up to this big ending question, what do you think, or what do you want to be seen done in the future to ensure better representation moving forward?
That's a hard question. I want us to not reduce race to what we see, but the full cultural narrative of people. And I think until we really consider deeply who that person is and then what we're representing, we'll never really move forward. Rather than what I see with my own eyes is what that person is, I think then, rather than this sort of assumptive, reductive version of representation, we really do need to engage in far deeper, far more rigorous conversation about people, representations, and the whole world, not just the ones that tick our box.
I do hope that becomes a reality.
Hopefully.
Me too. Yeah, I think that's it from us. Thank you so much for everything. I really enjoyed this discussion, and I think Nisbah did too.
Definitely.
Yeah,
definitely did. It was very insightful. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. It's really such an honor. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I will put all your social media platforms and everything else in the description box for everyone. And yeah, we hope to speak to you again soon.
All right. You take care.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye.
Bye.